The shock looks a little big, doesn't it? What is this thing? It's called the MegNeg, and it's a new replacement to your standard air can from RockShox that allows you to tune your shock in a new way. You've likely seen it on some professional bikes in the past, and it's now available as an aftermarket item. How does it work? How do you tune it? What bikes is it good on? What bikes is it not good on? I'm Brandon Turman with Vital MTB. Let's get into it. Over the past several years, we've seen negative volume on air shocks increase significantly, drastically improving their small bump performance. Here it is on a RockShox and one on a RockShox. But what if you went even further? What impacts would it have? How much negative volume is too much? That's the idea that Dave Camp, a RockShox engineer, dove into with the MegNeg. Remember seeing all those bulgy shock varieties last season? Well, Sam Hill and several other RockShox riders were involved in testing a variety of air cans. The name MegNeg is short for mega negative. This air can replacement provides up to 111% more negative volume than a stock air can, plus it gives you the ability to tune the negative spring using spacers. That's something RockShox has never offered before. By changing the number of bottomless ring volume spacers, you get from 64% more negative volume with 4 rings installed to 111% more negative volume with 0 rings installed. The only change is increased negative volume, while the positive volume, that's what you add air to with a pump, remains the same. Now, you might be wondering, what does negative volume do? Its primary purpose is to counteract the positive air spring, helping to get the shock moving and improving bump compliance. This graph shows a stock air can in the red and a MegNeg with 0 spacers installed, that's the blue line. Both have one positive token. It turns out that adding a bunch of extra negative volume does make another slight improvement in the initial stroke, but that initial feel is not where you're going to really notice a big difference. The mid-stroke, so that's everything from sag to 2/3 of travel, is where the MegNeg makes its biggest mark. Notice how the spring curve is more linear, helping to bring the mid-stroke closer to that of a coil? Because you're adding more negative volume, more pressure is required to reach that same sag point. The MegNeg makes it possible to run these higher pressures to get that mid and end stroke support that you desire without compromising the off-the-top feel. Up until now, you're most likely only used to seeing volume spacers and tokens for the positive air spring. Those make a big difference from 2/3 of travel to bottom out for that end stroke ramp, but they don't really impact the mid stroke much. So what comes in the kit? At $90, the MegNeg includes volume spacers, grease, and oil, plus the air can and decals. There are 3 sizes of MegNeg to fit 3 air can sizes. Earlier this year, I headed to Colorado Springs, the home of RockShox, to learn about, install, and tune the MegNeg Air Can using a transition patrol. Now, I wouldn't suggest putting the MegNeg on and just rolling with it. You need to take the time to do some back-to-back testing, which involves a lot of repeat laps on the same terrain. Start by establishing a baseline with your existing shock. Check your sag value, then rip a lap or 2 on a familiar trail while paying attention to how your suspension feels. Next, remove the shock from your bike, remove the stock air can, and install the MegNeg Air Can with no bands. This will provide the full 111% negative volume increase and have the most noticeable impact on your bike compared to the standard can. Quick side note, make sure you do this on a calm day free of dust or indoors if possible. This test shock had to be thoroughly flushed following our test. You're also going to want to use plenty of the supplied grease and a squirt of oil in the air can. Next, reinstall your shock and air up. You want to control variables by changing just one thing at a time and always using the same sag value. Note that your air pressure is going to go up. Now head up for a couple laps on the MegNeg with 0 bands. You're going to feel a pretty big difference here. Right away, I noted more support on compression and big hits, plus a much more lively feel, highlighting the increased mid-stroke and bottom out from running higher overall pressure. I didn't notice any reduction of traction or small bump compliance, but I did feel more of the bumps went deeper into the stroke through rough rocks. At this point, we installed 4 bands into the MegNeg, reducing that extra negative volume. During this run, I missed having the full amount of support that the previous run offered. The flat huck, occasionally pumpy terrain right behind RockShox back door really exposed the bike's tendency to sit a bit low, and I wanted it to pick itself up a bit more and just be ready for the next bump. Knowing what the 2 extremes feel like, tune from there. We went to 2 bands and I still wanted a bit more of that first run support. Then we made the call to go to just 1 band. With no spacers installed, it felt a bit too much at times, and with 1 band, it returned most of that mid-stroke support and a planted, firm, but compliant feel on landings without feeling a bunch of bumps. Note that some bikes may need a positive reduction with the MegNeg, but the Transition Patrol didn't. The MegNeg has also helped when it comes to pedaling and pumping. The Patrol is altogether more ready to go, feels like it's higher up in the travel, especially in the turns, and it's more peppy all around. For anyone who spends a lot of time in the bike park, you're also going to notice a benefit from the increased support when you sit less backseat in berms or walls through compressions. You can see it happening here with the stock RockShox. So, what are some downsides? Number 1 is the weight. Compared to a standard air can, you're looking at gaining about 65 grams. Is this worth it? I think so. Number 2 is higher pressure. That larger negative chamber requires about 20% more positive pressure. For one thing, that means a ton of pumping. In addition, the air can also has a max rating of 325 psi, so if you're currently running over 275 psi on your standard can, this might not be a good option. Number 3, dimple placement is critical. It turns out the placement of the small dimple that balances air between the positive and negative chamber can affect top out, and whether it happens fast or if it sinks into the travel a bit. The dimple is ideally placed for 2 bands on this product, so you might notice some things at the extremes. Number 4 is ease of use. It can be difficult to remove the air can retainer O-ring by hand, which you're going to be doing a lot of. It would be rad if there was a pull tab on there so you can grab it easily, but a pick will do. What types of bikes does it work well with? This air can is best for more linear, less progressive suspension designs like the Transition we used. What bikes does it not work well with? Anything that has a more progressive suspension layout. On these types of bikes, it's likely that you're going to feel too much of the terrain and may not be able to get full travel. If you're on a bike that starts digressive but has a significantly progressive end stroke like this one, the MegNeg will likely help with that mid stroke, but you're going to want to run fewer positive spring volume spacers. If you're constantly banging off the bottom of your bike's travel, have that sucker stacked fully of volume spacers, run the lowest suggested sag value, and you still aren't getting the support you're after, you absolutely want to consider the MegNeg. In the months since, I've ridden in dozens of locations. What I found was similar to that initial test, but on steeper, rougher trails, I felt a little bit too much of the terrain through my feet at times. As a result of this, I'll add 1 additional band to the negative chamber when riding rougher, steep terrain. For me, the addition of the MegNeg Air Can has made the Transition Patrol ride better than ever. You can tune compression stacks all you want, but addressing the spring curve is always going to be more impactful. This is an excellent upgrade for a reasonable price, and it will make a big difference on bikes that could benefit from added mid and end stroke support. You have to be willing to do some back-to-back testing though. It's really cool to see a product like the MegNeg from a big brand like RockShox because it encourages more in-depth tuning. If you enjoyed this video, hit up RockShox.com for more details. Like, comment, subscribe, and we'll see you on the trails.